Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear distinguished audience, dear social media audience, we are also live streamed on our ERIAC Facebook web page in this moment. Grateful to have the privilege to welcome you all to this third event of the ERIAC Net for EU project that today focuses on the topic of bringing the EU close to Roma. And as you will see in a minute, we want great speakers for this event that will be able to share their enormous expertise on successful EU grant making and policy influencing with all of you. I will be the moderator for today's online event and will be very short in between our speakers, as I want to leave as much time as possible for our audience to make comments, to ask questions after the sections in the Q&A. You should really use this this time. This is also why we do these events in the end. No, it's not to hear us speaking only. So dear speakers, I'm afraid I will also have to be very strict with you on the timing. Please stick to the 10 minutes maximum. After our words, I will have to gently remind you. And one more remark, we automated all of your cameras and micros to be switched off for a better flow. So please switch them on manually whenever you want to ask a question. And now it is my pleasure to give the words to our Executive Director, Timea Junghaus, to do the opening remarks for today's event.
Thank you, Juliana. Your Excellencies, dear board member Gilda Horvath, dear ERIAC membership, and dear distinguished audience. On behalf of the leadership of the European Roma Institute for Arts and Culture, I also welcome you and share with you how excited we are to create this opportunity. Because today we engage some of the strongest grant-making, alliance building, and policy influencing organizations in the Roma context and their experts for this first information session on the role of the EU in Roma inclusion efforts, to share the Roma experience in building EU relations, to mention future opportunities for participation and funding. We also count on your active participation and hope that you will use the question and answer sessions to benefit your interests and further stabilize, grow, and bring your own organizations closer to the EU. Today's conference is possible through the framework of the ERIAC Net for EU initiative, supported by the European Commission. In a very short but rather inspiring story, let me share with you the ERIAC example of getting closer to the EU. Together with Roma civil society organizations, ERIAC has been long advocating for the shift in focus of Roma targeted policies. From a socio-economic inclusion focus of the first Roma framework strategy, ERIAC advocated to address anti-Gypsyism as the root cause of Roma inclusion. ERIAC consulted actively the EU Roma strategic framework for equality, inclusion, and participation up to 2030, adopted in 2020. This new framework strategy addresses anti-Gypsyism, anti-Roma racism as a self-standing area. And the preventive approaches in the strategy include explicitly promoting awareness of Roma arts, history, and culture. And ERIAC is proud to have influence, even if in such minor ways, together, of course, with other consulting bodies, and also as a result of our common Roma effort, the framework strategy paper. ERIAC is active in consulting and curating cultural programming for the Council of Europe. The Council of Europe, of course, is a distinguished founder of ERIAC. We recommend other Roma organizations to use the opportunities created by the Council of Europe for civil society dialogues. And in 2020, we reached another milestone, and ERIAC became the member of the ADIROM Committee of Experts on Roma and Traveler Issues at the Council of Europe. And now comes the interesting part of the ERIAC story, because the ERIAC story of getting closer to the EU is also not only of successes, of course. ERIAC wrote 17 grant applications between 2017 and 2020 without winning funding or benefiting directly from the collaboration with the EU. And the ERIAC board is aware of the struggle of ERIAC regarding this. And it's a privilege to have Gilda Horvath here today with us, who can also reflect on this. We were rather frustrated with our unrequited efforts, and the biggest lesson in 2020 for ERIAC was that we diversify our efforts. We continue improving our grant writing skills and aim for project leader status, while at the same time, we also open up for smaller project partnerships. We were a small project partner in the EU-funded initiative WEAVE, Widen European Access to Cultural Communities via Europeana, funded by Innovation and Networks Executive Agency, the Department Connecting Europe facility. Rosa Cisneros, the scholar, Coventry University, will later explain this in detail and the purpose of this initiative. And we were also a small project partner in Manifesto 14, Pristina, co-producing common space and shaping formations of solidarity in the Western Balkans and beyond, funded by Creative Europe, also by the European Commission. In 2021, ERIAC successfully won the ERIAC-Net for EU project that runs under the Citizens, Equality, Rights and Values program and is funded by the European Union, in particular by the European Education and Cultural Executive Agency. As a result, this year in 2022, we have been able to engage our membership sections actively, created a women's initiative inside the membership, and created trainings and assemblies building and advocating EU values inside and beyond our organization. Thank you for your attention. I open for questions, of course, later in the Q&A section, and I hope to hear your stories, and I hope and I wish you a very inspiring conference today.
Thank you, Timea. Now we will start our first section on EU Roma diplomacy and successful grant making. Dear Petrica, I see your camera switched on already. Executive Director of the Roma Entrepreneur Development Initiative, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Juliana and Timea for the invitation. And I'm very happy to see so many people connected to this online conference on a very interesting subject. So I think the subject of access to finance and the challenges related to this is extremely important. We were established in 2016. I think from 2016 to now, we submitted more than maybe 50 or 60 applications for funding of different programs at the European Union, starting with Erasmus+, regional programs, programs funded by EASY, different donors. And recently I had a conversation with someone from the national agency of one of the implementers of EU funds, who was complaining that Roma organizations are not among the successful organizations. And I shared with her that I have a team of 3 people who are writing proposals, and the people who are writing proposals already have at least a master's from CEU. And I don't know how many grassroots organizations can afford to have on the payroll 2 or 3 people with a master's application. So obviously, if Ready is not fully capable to submit this, then I think grassroots organizations would have it even more challenging to develop and submit successful applications. The biggest challenge of what I more or less see among the organizations that manage to submit these sort of winning proposals is that the proposals are developed by external consultants who are very much skilled in packaging the idea in a specific format. And I think this is, one of the things that we are learning to do. We have ideas, we have things that are fully aligned with our strategy, and we know what the field wants. But there's a difference between what we know is needed versus what the European Commission or even other donors would want to see. I think there's 2 donors that are very much open to have the conversation, and also to be honest, the flexibility to understand that one project that you might write 1 year or last year versus what you start seeing on the field 2 or 3 years later, it's actually going to be quite difficult and different. You won't be able to submit an application and keep that fully accurate to what has been supported. So in our experience, we have projects from Erasmus Plus. I think the Erasmus Plus project is quite useful for smaller organizations. After some back and forth, you kind of understand how the evaluators look at the proposal. Then we have other projects which are supported by GIZ, which is a German development funds, SIDA and Helvetas, as well as the European Commission. We have grants from SERV as well as DGNIR. So I think overall our experience is there's quite a lot of bureaucracy, and I think only specific organizations in a more developed stage can actually go through the hoops. And you really need to know how to describe the project in such a way the evaluators from the European Commission can understand what you want and fund it. I think
Petrica, can you still hear us? You seem to have lost the connection somehow, or we lost you at least. Can you still hear us? That's a pity. Maybe Petrica lost the connection. Maybe we hope that he will come back in a minute. So maybe we should just go on with our next speaker then, and maybe Petrica can come back when he is reconnected. Yeah, okay. Sorry about that to everybody, and sorry, dear Isabela, I hope you would be ready to speak now, because I would now like to give the word to Isabela Mihalache, who is a Senior Policy Advocacy Officer at ERGO, also with a long-term experience. Please, if you are ready to jump in like this, I'm sorry to catch you like this. Thank you very much, Isabela. Hi.
Thank you. I hope you can see me well. Yes. Okay, perfect. No, thank you very much for the opportunity to address you and everybody watching on this topic. I was also asked to talk about the experience that ERGO has and successes it brought along in terms of policy making, so not just fundraising in itself. And so I would like to start by saying that ERGO has today more than 30 member organizations across the European Union, Western Balkans, Turkey, and Ukraine, and it's now slowly expanding. And it focuses on achieving equality, socio-economic and civil and political participation of Roma in all spheres of life, whereby we also try to mobilize and connect the grassroots, national and international organizations and individuals who share the same value as ours and aim to combating anti-Gypsyism and Roma poverty, strengthening the Roma civil society participation in decision-making at grassroots level, but also national and European level, and aiming to committing governments and the European institutions to effective social inclusion and anti-discrimination policies, standards, but also funding for Roma. When it comes to the lessons learned, we draw our lessons from the grassroots, and in particular from the impact this work has on the ground. While we don't pretend to represent Roma communities, we try to present and to share and to promote accurate evidence of the situation of Roma communities through working closely with our members and proposing policies that can be adopted both by European institutions, but also by national governments, using our in-house expertise, but also cooperative and inclusive working methods. As many other network organizations, we had to learn by doing and improve, if you want, our vision, our focus, our methods, as well as our knowledge. And we learned very much early on that we can't really do great things alone, and that we need to seek strong and wide cooperation with the Roma movement, but also more recently outside of the Roma movement. And so our vision was at the beginning maybe closely linked to more subjective views of, I would say, its own founders, but slowly gained support from larger crowds, which became then our members, and which was a primarily local community development based vision, if you want. And in many of the cases, it brought concrete changes for the local communities, supported by our members, and even piloted important EU-funded initiatives using this so-called CLLD, or community-led local development-based methodology that ERGO and our members have promoted for many years. We have slowly moved in our vision from this empowerment perspective, which was more community-led based, also to infuse, if you want, a more human rights-based perspective within it, also reflective of the general trend in the Roma movement internationally, and also thanks to a closer cooperation with other European policy-based networks, including by becoming part of the EU Roma Policy Coalition, an initiative in 2018, which has since then promoted the idea of a European Roma strategy. And so with this, and combined with the paper of the Alliance Against Anti-Gypsyism in 2006, focusing on the fight against anti-Gypsyism, we have sustained ever since that the major policy we have sustained ever since that the situation and the challenges of the Roma communities stem from anti-Gypsyism, and this has been ever since a major policy challenge, if you want, that we have observed both at EU level, but also at the level of member states. And so we have since then focused primarily on this in working with policymakers and politicians to put forward policies addressing anti-Gypsyism, both as a standalone, but also as a cross-cutting problem in Roma inclusion and equality policies. And so if you want, the 2020 EU Roma framework is a major policy success to which we, together with so many others, have contributed to. And so where we have within the EU framework 3 main pillars: equality and the fight against anti-Gypsyism, the promotion of inclusion and the fight against poverty, and Roma participation. And so to get to this point, because I have mentioned this is a major success in terms of policy, there's been a lot of work and effort that has been put in by the entire Roma movement. And we have worked also very closely with our partners inside and outside the Roma movement. And so we have also learned in the meantime what works and what doesn't work in terms of policy making, and what type of negotiation skills are necessary. And we have built, or since then tried to work around very clear principles and guidelines that combine legitimacy, evidence-based arguments, partnership, empowerment, transparency, and a very broad outreach. In terms of fundraising, we are still building, if you want, our knowledge and capacity for successful fundraising, which requires efforts on a number of levels, which include, of course, an increased level of professionalism, but also credibility and legitimacy. Today, or if you want, this year, we are doing quite well in terms of fundraising. But at the beginning, if we are to look at the beginning of ERGO, we were struggling with small amounts of funds, mainly from private donors and foundations. But our presence in Brussels and the focus on EU Roma policies deriving from the knowledge and the work of our members finally led that ERGO started to receive funding, core funding, from the European Commission, and slowly also from more donors and partner organizations, which with whom many times we apply together for funding. And sometimes even our members include us as partners in their funding projects and programs. And so currently we are developing, in fact, a fundraising strategy to ensure that that ERGO and our network has sufficient funding for the years to come, in order to continue the role as bridge between the grassroots realities and the EU policy making. And our strategy at this point is still in the work, but it defines our needs, but also the strengths and weaknesses and the impact of the fundraising efforts on the work that we are trying to do. And also we try to identify, of course, new potential funding possibilities. Among our strengths, if you want, for fundraising as a something that we can share is indeed, I think, our gained unique position with EU policymakers and civil society partners in Brussels, because we are based in Brussels, in being able to influence the European policies and standards that can reduce inequality of Roma across Europe. Our active role in empowering Roma civil society at national and local level to influence local and national based policies affecting Roma, but also our role in monitoring the implementation of policies and holding policymakers accountable. And lastly, I would say our expertise in raising awareness about anti-Gypsyism and creating and trying to create a narrative about how to fight anti-Gypsyism more successfully. I would stop here because I think probably that the time is already ended, but I'm definitely here if there are questions and comments. So thank you very much again for the opportunity to share a bit of our experience with everyone.
Thank you very much, dear Isabela. Very useful. We pick up probably in the question and answer many of the stuff you also just said. Dear Petrica, I know that you are back. We lost you earlier. Would you like to just jump back in where you were interrupted earlier? Is that okay?
Yes, I apologize. My internet connection was lost. But my point was that we really need to have a conversation with the big donors as well as with the European Commission to try to make sure that civil societies, and I mean organizations which are at the beginning of their life, manage to go through a process, through an application process which is simplified. So whenever you're requesting, I don't know, 50 to 100,000 euros, you likely need to go through a process which is completely different than when you're requesting 3 million euros, right? So the level of information requested, the amount of data, as well as the whole complexity of the application process should be aligned with the amount of resources that you try to get it. In venture capital and in business, there is a substantial difference when you go in and you request a loan or equity for 10 million euros versus when you request 30,000 for a proof of concept. And I really believe that this is the type of conversation we should have. obviously, organizations like Roma Education Fund or ERGO or REDI or ERIAC can now, when in time, can now go through all of these, complicated processes with the European Commission, but not the same thing can be said by organizations which are just startups or organizations which request up to 50,000 or 100,000 euros. So I think this was my key message. And once again, I apologize for being disconnected.
Thank you very much for coming back and concluding your remarks. We will come back in the question answers to many of the points you also made. Now I would like to give the words to Ciprian, the chairman and acting director of the Roma Education Fund. Please, the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much. Thank you for organizing this. I think it's an excellent work that you always do, challenging somehow us to discuss and debate on the issues that I think are very relevant for Roma communities. Just a small correction, I'm not the active director of Roma Education Fund, just the executive chair of it. Also, I'm teaching in university in the Master of Romani Studies, and I think that's also relevant. And probably the fact that I've been for a while a state secretary on the EU Funds Ministry in Romania. So that's a very interesting discussion, and I think very relevant to all of us, because somehow we all rely on EU funding when it comes to Roma communities. It's either implementing by the states, either local authorities, either NGOs. EU funds, it's an important tool for startup, for piloting, for experiment, and then hopefully the states will do with their own resources. It's good that we already discussed about challenges from the other side, from the EU politics and grant making. What I would like to address is also from our side as NGOs. Roma Education Fund hold and implementing EU-funded projects both in EU and the Western Balkans for a while, and I hope that it will continue. One of the problems that I want to reflect is actually our position in relation to EU funds and to the changing context. That's something very important that we have to acknowledge. And unfortunately, I see somehow stuck opinions and solutions for Roma communities while the context is changing with many other things. Only in the last few years we had COVID-19 that changed dramatically the way that we interact, the way that we educate, the way of doing many other things. We have also a war in Ukraine that it's attacked by Russia, and that's changing somehow also the priorities and the way how we see the world, and also Roma lives from Ukraine, and not only from Ukraine, also from neighboring countries, and the priorities that the government are focusing on. Moreover, I will also address the rise of the populism and the extreme right parties in EU. And EU actually is under attack of its own politicians, and we know that very visible. So the context is changing somehow in a way that we have to adapt continuously to it. Ignoring the context and come up with the solutions that were valid 5 years ago, I don't think that it will be very convincing for any grant making to support the idea. Also, let's say I talk only about negative things, but also you can talk about positive developments of EU, for instance, Green Pact and this direction, ECO, and all this that is around us, that is again changing our context and priorities of the grant making. Understanding that and using in our successful diplomacy and grant making, I think it might make a change. Also, I don't think that an organization by itself can manage to change completely the approach and to contribute dramatically to a change that is really visible. I think partnership is very relevant, and here we already are developing our partnerships and strategies designed in order to take into account these changes that are next to us, and it's dramatically changing the context, but also to reinforce our capacity to administrate funds. EU funds are not easy. I know many NGOs that died because of EU funds. In Romania, where I come from, I cannot give you a percent, but many organizations failed to implement those projects. And that's because EU funds means also high management, high risks, non-eligible cost. And you put in danger actually the organization and, at the end, the civil society. And this is the effect, the negative effect of the EU funding in Romania towards NGO. States were comfortable with that. And I've been a state secretary, and I know what I'm talking about. They've been comfortable because, somebody else were doing the job of, of them. And they take all the responsibility on their shoulders of working for Roma and with Roma. That's an easy tactic, because what happened? Few NGOs resisted on this, highly managerial responsibility, and the rest basically disappeared, or they're just some voices, but without activities and without implementing anything, because they're in debt. So the problem is who is capable to administrate EU funds, what is the responsibility of NGOs, and what are the limits? What is the responsibility of the local authorities that are responsible and they absorb a lot of EU funds, but they're not accountable on this regard? We're not talking about how much of the EU funds are going to the local authorities for Roma and what they do with this money. Who's monitoring and evaluating this program? How many of these programs actually are creating, being programs supported for Roma, creating anti-Roma policies, anti-Roma effects? Probably we need to understand better what is the effect of EU funds and how this can be prevented from this negative side. Otherwise, there are many positive results too. We saw in many communities changes with EU funds from economical perspective, from educational perspective, for social inclusion, and so on. The problem is, again, sustainability. Who's responsible to continue this? And how we ensure that? So there are rather many questions on the table than answers from my side with all my experience from the past. What I will say at the end, EU funds, I think, are great for the ones that are trained to implement those EU funds. And I think the main responsibility of absorbing EU funds is state and then local authorities. And our responsibilities as civil society should be mainly on watching what they do with these resources, monitoring and report on it. But again, I understand also that probably many said, okay, state is not capable, they won't do it, we should do it. So then probably you should think, a special dedicated fund to NGOs that works in Roma communities, as Petrica mentioned, with less bureaucracy and shorter projection. So understand that context is changing from today till project is founded. So since you apply to the moment that you receive the contract, in a way that can support a civic Roma movement that is active at local level and helps and contributes to the other efforts to inclusion of the Roma. Even the term inclusion, it's quite interesting from this point of view. I think EU bureaucracy is struggling to find the right words. Policies for Roma were named over the years in different ways, but I think has something in common. If after the slavery in Romania, the policy was called emancipation of the Roma, and they started emancipation. Later on, they were talking about assimilation of the Roma during the communism in Romania, I'm talking. Then later on, early 90s was integration of the Roma. And now they're talking about inclusion of the Roma. What these things has in common? Well, there are policies of others towards Roma. So again, where is the Roma voice within all these processes? How actually Roma voice, it will matter when you talk about policies towards Roma. And that's again another question that I'll raise. Successful diplomacy and successful Roma, let's say, contribution, I saw many, but I will say not that relevant that will change a context. Not that relevant that will change a policy as a whole. You see small successes, and if they're not linked between different organizations, different entities, different subjects, education, labor, whatever, this is not going to be successful, because every time when a Roma person, individual, organization, coalition, network has success, believe that this is the first time when this happened. I see this for the first time, It's always for the first time. And that's because we don't connect the dots. I see also Roma that are working for European Parliament or for European Commission that are way centuries beyond our current realities and not understanding their role and what they have to do to connect those dots and to put at the table Roma voices, no matter their opinion. Unfortunately, this is not the case with what we have in the Commission right now as Roma employees, as well what happened in the European Parliament. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear Ciprian, Necula. Also very relevant comments. Maybe we can now use the time, dear audience, dear also online, social media online audience, please also post your questions on Facebook. It will arrive here. So please, dear audience, now is the time to make your comments, pose your questions. You can raise your hands or speak.
Romale, because nobody is having a question or answer yet, want to refer to that. All you Romani people out there being here today, you heard what our experts are saying. This is very important expertise. And if there was ever a point where you really should air your opinion and expertise, please do it now. Contribute to this discussion now, because it will result in very concrete action. Be aware of that. So please pose your questions now. Putrentu marumui akana kanasimi shtotumenge.
Rosa, please, I see that you raised your hand.
Yes, hello everyone. I just wanted to thank the first panel because there are lots of really interesting and powerful, I think, points that are being raised, particularly around kind of funding and transparency, but also, the first speaker was talking about having trained people to look at funding. And I think that's a really really important comment to really maybe think about for some time, because applying for funding, especially within these EU frameworks, is very complex. And I think that you do need people who have an understanding. And while I think that it's great to have trained or people with those skills, for me the question is, how do we bring up or bring in our, those grassroots community, the civil society, as, was also mentioned. And, there are different ways to do that, but I feel like, is there a way with shadowing, or if you have a project with different kind of profiles and partners involved in that project, could we ensure that they're also included in that, or could we create space within projects to help us think about and talk about that funding process, so that, you know, we don't always rely on the expertise of those that have the tools to go and look for the funding, but that we also start training. So for me, it's about shadowing, and I've seen that a lot in some of my own projects where the grassroots organizations get a bit overwhelmed, whether with the reporting process to the funders, and they say, oh, well, could you just do it? And I think some of it is lack of knowledge, but also lack of confidence. And so I think that that's that step, like, how do we bring along and ensure that we're creating the spaces and opening up to share that knowledge, so that the expertise, you know, isn't just sitting with those that are actually highly qualified. I think it's great that you can do that, but again, how can we also kind of, find other ways? And this idea of monitoring and reporting, again, I think, you know, being super transparent, and how do we ensure that within the projects that we're running, but then also helping each other kind of be transparent and make sure we're ethical and equitable in different ways. So, you know, I know for some of us, with the civil society organizations that I work with in Spain, they post their finances on the website, so that can be, you know, there's an external auditor. So that kind of checks and balances is happening in different ways. So I suppose it wasn't a question, but just rather a comment and reflecting on what I've been hearing from today. So thank you for that. Thank you, everyone.
We have a next question. Or Petrica, Dulgheru, would you like to say something to this directly, or should I get to the next question?
No, you can get to the next question. I thought that this was a question. Thank you.
Okay. Dear Leila Savic, I see that you also raised your hand.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much for this. It was quite interesting. Building on what was said, I don't think it's very much of a lack of knowledge. Indeed, there's a huge, oh no, I can't start my video. It's way too early here, sorry. I was at a conference last week. So I work in media, and we are doing a lot of initiatives around looking for funding. And I was just at a conference last week in Chicago, where some colleagues of mine in media were mentioning how there's a lot of community powered initiatives there, and quite a few funding for BIPOC led initiatives. And so once somebody said, you know, don't hire a grant writer, hire a grant writing firm who specialized in this. And I thought that was really great, but we don't have the equivalent of that in the Roma community. So my question is actually to ERIAC and other civil society members here who want to help Roma members. I think it would be really great to think about this, and building on that. I don't think it's a lack of knowledge. I really think it's a lack of capacity. I've been trying to work with a few colleagues of mine to get some funding around a project based in Europe. I've sent emails to many people, and I haven't gotten many replies. And I know it's absolutely normal in everyone's limited capacity, but can we build something around that, around building capacity? Because the people there, sometimes what I do notice, especially in my work, is that, you know, the people who are getting the funding are the ones doing the advocacy, and there's a great need for advocacy, but the people who are doing the work in the community with the people are not getting the funding because they don't really have the capacity to do that. And so sometimes the community work is much more of frankly, the impactful one, rather the shiny one, who's able to appease with the advocacy. So my thinking is, where are you going in terms of that? Building, you know, a series of people whose specialty, a firm, or I don't know what it is, whose specialty it is to apply for funding to help entrepreneurs and civil society organizations deal with capacity evaluation, project management. I think that, you know, building a project, as many have said, is a great idea, but applying it is something else. And then sometimes what we've learned definitely in our past year was that there was no capacity evaluation in the projects we applied for. So it was really hard to do them because they were relying on a really small team who didn't have the expertise. And that's another point I'd like to make / question maybe. When we're talking about building projects for Roma community, we also need to ensure, rather than trying to train, either the ED or the founder or the 3 people in the organization, I'm talking more grassroots, it's also important to understand that, people's limitations. While we do take time to train people, they will refrain from their activities, which are, based on the organization they've created. So just a little point here, I think it'd be great to also think about organizations such as ERGO or others. What can you do? Can you pay for a grant writer, for a person who's responsible for finances for either one Roma organization or a few Roma organizations? So yeah, we'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Leila. So it's a very, very good point. Isabela, Mihalache, I see that you switched to cell phone. Do you want to say something to this?
Yes, thank you so much, Tim. I actually would like to address also the previous comments, but also this last one. And I do agree that the focus has to be on the capacity building of NGOs to apply for funding, but at the same time, there is the other side of the issue, which is the challenges within the calls for proposals and the where we have to work. And in the last years, and with this new programming, I think the Commission has made a lot of efforts to make their eligibility criteria a little bit easier for small organizations to apply. And so nowadays, it is possible for a number of organizations, small organizations, to come together and apply together. But also the co-financing sometimes for particular calls is reduced to 10% from 20%. This is also an important step. But when it comes to the capacity building, what we have done so far is to use a double approach perspective, which is both to when we apply, to make sure that we apply together with some of our members, and that also members amongst themselves, they are able to also apply together. So it's not just one unique member that would apply. We would normally encourage them to apply regionally. So for instance, the Western Balkans members would apply together for DG NEAR funding. And sometimes ERGO would also be there as a international or European partner to be able to support with capacity building, to be able to disseminate the results, to be able to do the advocacy around the project, so that the project would have more visibility, and will also be able to collect more expertise, other funding, contributions into the project. And so that has been an important lesson that we try to implement over the years, which is working quite successfully. And so today we can say that we have a number of members that are able to get funding from the EU through the direct funding schemes by the Commission programs, much more than previously. And to the last comment, I would say it's not so much of just hiring someone to do your project proposals, because you also have to implement. And so it's more about having an ongoing capacity building scheme built within your vision, within your structures, your work as an organization. Particularly for us, network organization, it's important to have that inbuilt. And so throughout the years, to be able to build the capacity of the organizations to be able to apply. But as we know, in the beginning, unless you have proved that you were able already to spend or to collect a number of funds, you are not going to be eligible. So that's why you have to really look at all the steps that are required for NGOs to become eligible and try to build on each of them so that in time, after 3 years, 4 years, they're able to also apply for small funds. The challenge that remains though is with the bigger funds, which is shared management funds that are from the European Commission and the national governments, which is much, and I guess colleagues here from the national ground can speak more about it, where it's still very challenging for them to apply. And so the conditions there still have to be improved. We still have to have Roma within managing authorities in the monitoring community, monitoring committees by the managing authorities that are implementing the operational programs. Some countries have it, but not all the countries have it. We still have to make sure that the calls are also reaching Roma NGOs. In many of the cases, you would have these very professional type of companies that are applying for Roma grants, getting the money, and sometimes just hiring here and there a Roma expert just to have the legitimacy and to be able to get the grants. So there I see that there's still a lot of work to do, and where we have to also focus our advocacy to make sure that not just the capacities are built, but also the regulations in providing the funds to Roma communities are simplified. And to our knowledge, and maybe Ciprian and others can comment, and Petrica, the Norway grants funds remain one of the main funding opportunities at national level for NGOs, and the particular type of stream of funding that goes to civil society for empowerment, human rights, social inclusion, and Roma in particular. Thank you.
I have a question. Thank you, Isabela, Mihalache. Petrica, would you like to say something?
Yeah, so I wanted to comment on the capacity building. I really believe that the European Commission should learn much more from the Open Society foundations. So the OSF recognized many years ago that it's extremely important to build that capacity where that capacity is missing. I don't think the solution is to get consultants from the outside as a small organization. And I don't think the solution is to kind of work with large organizations, which are mostly coming from the Western Europe, which have built up somehow this expertise, and they don't have the expertise in the Roma communities, because these guys are just gonna come in, consume the resources and go away. Working with extremely small grassroots organizations, which don't have the capacity to write the project proposals in the language that EU evaluators are used to getting them, but building up the capacity so that young people who live in those communities, learn how to write the project proposals in the specific language. But I don't think it's just writing and getting the funds. And I very much liked Ciprian's point, because it's not about getting the resources, but it's very much learning how to manage those resources. And I think here OSF has done a great job building up the capacity of the organizations that they work with, introducing auditing, reporting and procedures, doing all the checks and balances so that the organization is healthy from a financial administration procedure. So I think the European Commission, as well as the Norway funds, they need to start looking at programs that build up the capacity from the grassroots towards the higher up, so that in the next 5 years, they have a great competition for the funds that they are launching. We all know that at this point, the amount of resources that are currently being contracted is much, much smaller than the total amount of resources available. And this gets back to the same point, capacity building, right? So you need to have a substantial program where the whole point is building up cadre, building up mechanisms, training people how to work with such a heavy bureaucracy, and later on using the civil society and the rest of the resources to achieve the goals. So this was my point. Thank you.
If you allow me, ERIAC was addressed by Lela Savic before, and I also would like to reflect on the notion of capacity building that was emphasized both by Isabela Mihalache and Petrica Dulgheru, because we have a lot of ERIAC members sitting with us, and naturally you have an interest on how to access this know-how that ERIAC developed. And most importantly, we at ERIAC also feel that this is the first time that we engage about this know-how, if we can call it know-how at all. And this conversation must continue. But most importantly, we recognize that the achievement that we are able to access EU funds also means the responsibility of sharing what we know and disseminating what we can transfer to the membership and to the wider network and wider community of ERIAC. But we would never act, or we would never claim the position of any kind of expertise, because we struggle with the gigantic load of bureaucracy. We are still learning EU administration. We are way behind ERGO and other policy influencing efforts. And we are not proven to be successful. You are proven to be successful with an EU grant when you're audited after you completed your project, and the auditor also considers you immaculate and perfect, and there is nothing to repay, and your organization remains stable. So we continue engaging, transferring transparently what we have achieved so far. But we all need to be aware of the process and the load of bureaucracy and the process of the EU in this regard.
Thank you, Timea. And now the other person next to me, Gilda Howard, would also like to pose a question.
Thank you. Thank you, Iuli. Once again, te avem Bartale, Romale. Just a very short comment referring to what was said here, not from my position as a board member, but from my position as a fundraiser on national and international level. I really would like to support everything that Petrica and also Ciprian and also Lela said. I think although they might think what they said sometimes might be paradox, it's not. I see that there is a solution on the horizon. Maybe it's far, far away. Maybe it's not tomorrow. Maybe it takes years to build something up like this. But I was very inspired by Ciprian talking about connecting the dots, because it's true that maybe not ERIAC alone or any other organization alone can do that capacity building, because thanks to very many engaged self-organizations, our community, active community also has grown. But the idea of having something like a hub focusing on fundraising, focusing not on fundraising, but on the capacity building of the ability to fundraise, I think this is a very attractive, but also very intelligent idea, even if it might take time to figure out how, in which format, which organizations need to collaborate. But I think actually this kind of idea is what is starting today to maybe manifest, and also needs something that we didn't talk about today, which is trust. Actually, if we want to connect dots between organizations, between topics, if we want to bundle our strengths or know-how that is here in the community, we also need to build trust between those organizations who already carry this expertise And we need to start sharing this expertise, the format, how we do it. This might everything be questions of the future, but I also think it's not the only way to rely on external consultants. We should have that expertise in our community, and we should be able to share this community, because what Petrica said is also very true. It's not only about writing a professional grant appointment. It's very much, and this is what Michaela Satriano knows very well with all her expertise in many years, it's mainly about understanding the language, understanding the mindset of those who call themselves donors, and actually be able to package your own idea in exactly that language and mindset that they want to see. In the long term, I also don't see this as a solution, and I'm with Ciprian, that in the long term, we have to think about how EU is reacting better to our realities. But meanwhile, let's learn their mindset, let's learn how to frame their language, and let's get the money that now at this very moment is given to a lot of gadget consultant agencies.
Thank you, dear Gilda. I can see that Deje Mate is raising his hand. Maybe that would be the last comment and question. Please, Deje.
Yes, thank you very much and welcome everyone. Actually, I totally agree with Gilda and with Ciprian. Previously, I also planned to raise my hand, but now Gilda just encouraged me very much. So I was thinking, actually, Ciprian highlighted the words inclusion, assimilation, and integration. And as far as I know, the EU bodies, the different EU proposals, they very much using this language and they promoting this kind of wording. And in my understanding and point of view, using this kind of words in cooperation or with connection with Romani community, for me, those are highly anti-Gypsyist. And my suggestion or my critical thinking, like I think we should really rethink the frameworks of this kind of notions and yes, notions, let's say, and phenomena, because for me, using Roma inclusion or Romani assimilation, it is a kind of manifestation on the Gypsies by the non-Romani people who are actually kind of our alliances, let's say, but it is also my critical point of view, like, for me, those people are not my alliances who are not giving place and space for Romani people, for experts on high level in different offices, on different NGOs actually, because I'm very critical in this point of view, because there are thousands of Romani experts and Romani people who has higher educations and they have no space and no place, and they are they have no work on the Romani field as well, because the non-Romani people, our alliance, is taking them spaces. For me, those the people who call them alliances would be alliance if they would give the space for the Romani people in the name of Romani integration. So these are my comments, and that's why my suggestions, like, you know, like we are writing different EU proposals and so on, like we're using those kind of racist language. Sorry for my very harsh comment, which is created by non-Romani people. For me, Roma integration or Romani assimilation is strictly an anti-Gypsyist manifestation. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Deje. Also very relevant comment. I'm sorry that I have to look on the time now. So I would close the question and answers for this section now and move on to our second section on tips and recommendations. I mean, that's all interrelated, on tips and recommendations on EU grant making and policy influencing. So of course, dear Iulius Rostas, I called you an expert on EU policy for decades. Please share your views with us.
Thank you very much, Juliana and Julia, and welcome everyone. Well, let me start with a longer term perspective. Few weeks ago, we never mentioned that we should have celebrated the first ever important policy document of the European Commission towards Roma. At the end of July 1997, the European Commission released what was called at that time the Agenda 2000, that mentioned the Roma as a political criteria, among the political criteria for the EU candidate countries to adhere to the EU. So if we have a look back at what happened in the past 25 years, it's really significant and important development. Yeah. And yeah, I want to point out this because the European Commission had a departure from its non-ethnic policies, and they created an ethnic policy for Roma, yeah, back in 2011, and then in 2020 renew with a new strategic framework. Yeah, so that has to be pointed out, that there is also evolution. Yeah, if 25 years ago the most important term was social integration of Roma, then it got to social inclusion of Roma. Yeah. Now in the current framework we have equality, participation, and inclusion. So there is some progress. The first EU framework that I analyzed in a book that is I will share it also on the chat link here. I identified few gaps, or certain points that were creating inconsistencies when it comes to Roma policies. And some of them have been mentioned already in the previous panel, from ignoring racism and identity issues to focusing on social economic issues only, problems with the target group definition, limited policy tools, unrealistic goals, weak gender component, yeah, and unclear mechanisms of implementation, no evaluation and monitoring mechanism, yeah, and of course unclear funding mechanisms. So all these have been I analyzed in the book that I just shared its link here in the chat. And of course, the new EU framework is an improvement. Yeah. Now anti-gypsies, combating anti-gypsies is a priority. Yeah. We have horizontal and themes that have to be addressed, yeah, including by the member states, equality and so on. However, there are certain challenges that are still there, and that those challenges have to be discussed and approached by the EU member states and Roma themselves. And of course, one of the most important is the voice of the Roma. Yeah. Now, how do we make sure that Roma articulate their voices, and that's not a single voice? I think I'll point out the danger of the single voice of Roma. Yeah, we have to recognize that we Roma are diverse, that we have certain common elements, but we also have distinct histories of oppression that depends very much on national and regional context, and that something that might work in one country might not work on the other one. So there is no recipe for that is valid for all the Roma communities throughout Europe. And for that reason, we have to give voice to all the Roma. So that's the danger of a single voice of Roma. Then, of course, we have to talk a little bit about the challenge of the multi-level governance. Yeah, we have something that is discussed in Brussels and at EU level, but then when it gets to the national level, and from there to regional and then local level, those priorities and the language switches and shifts in such a way that disturbs and distorts the reality on the ground. My preferred example is that one on inclusive education, that at the end, when it gets down on EU funding, inclusive education turns out to be about building a school, repairing some buildings and so on, because the mayor and the local authorities are mostly interested in providing contracts to their own political supporters than doing something for the Roma. Now, also in this multi-level governance structures, we have to make sure that Roma act and do not play only the role of implementing projects, yeah, but rather they go and make sure that the Roma voice is heard there at the very local level, among the priorities and how it is implemented and why, and they change policies. One of the most disturbing issue that comes when discussing Roma and EU is always about policies versus projects. We cannot change the situation in Roma communities and in our societies just by implementing projects. We have to think how these projects that eventually we are implementing, ideally in partnership with local authorities and state authorities, of course, will lead to a policy change. That's the main challenge. We are not just doing projects for the sake of doing projects, though I know many organizations get into that logic. At one moment, they lose their vision and their focus, and they get, from one project to another, reporting them, meeting indicators, and they forget, in fact, that they serve a larger interest of the Roma communities. So how we create, in fact, a commitment to equality and anti-racism, basically. That's a challenge that we have also to think, and that's also within our organizations. It's so easy to articulate, to say, oh yeah, Roma equality, but it's more difficult to do it. Then we have also to think that when we talk about equality, we talk about gender equality as well. So it's not only about, a Roma man, unfortunately, that's what is happening, that are having the most important positions, even in these structures, yeah? So we have to think that there are others among Romani communities that are even more excluded. So how do we create a culture of equality that later on we transfer it also to local authorities, to regional and central governments, and why not to the European Commission as well? So that's a challenge that probably we have to start. Then I think the biggest point I want to make, and the most important, is that in my book, after evaluating the first EU framework on Roma, I called for a change in paradigm, a switch of paradigm in conceptualizing the Roma. How do we conceptualize? What exactly do we want? Do we want to improve the Roma situation? Will that help with few projects? Or do we want equality and something on a longer term? How do we imagine a society that we wish to live in, and our children and grandchildren? I think that's really difficult, yeah. But we are here in a company and in an institution, yeah, where we have to debate and to think about these issues. Because my impression is that even among Roma organizations all over Europe, we do not have a common vision of what we want to achieve. And therefore, it's just normal that EU and state authorities are also improvising. Yeah. So we have to make very clear our claims and demands. Yeah. And of course, this might differ from country to country, from region to region, from our own priorities and visions. But we have to make very clear those claims, yeah, and demands. Now, on private funders, it's the same. We tend to think that it's easier to deal with private funders. Well, not the case. And let me use the same example that Isabela used, yeah, Norwegian funds. It's true for for civil society, especially in Central and Eastern Europe. This became an important source of funding. Yeah. Unfortunately, when it comes to Roma, the Norwegian funds are misused, and somehow Norwegian government and the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has to be aware of that when they are funding, yeah, initiatives where Roma have no saying in it, like a virtual museum of Roma. Have you ever heard about that project? It's non-existent, but €1 million went away and nobody knows why. Or, you know, mapping Roma communities, yeah, in Romania, again, done by an institution that has among its employees 1 or 2 Roma. Nobody knows what exactly happens except the report that, you know, was definitely not worth €1 million. So many other projects are like that, that we do not know, yeah? So we have to work with also private funders. And I think Petrica gave the example of OSF. Yeah, it took OSF almost, you know, 20 years to learn that that's, you know, something to do, to engage with Roma. And I do have to say that hopefully OSF will take this initiative and will work with other private donors and share with them their own lessons on how to engage with Roma, emphasizing especially that Roma are diverse and there are multiple voices within Roma communities. I will stop here because I'm already over the 10 minutes, but I'll be glad to answer any questions you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear Iulius. I couldn't interrupt you. It was too important what you just said. So thank you very much. Dear Rosa Cisneros, our experienced scholar that's connected to the WE project, at least for me at ERIAC. Please, the floor is yours now.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. For those that would benefit from a visual, from a verbal description, I am a female Roma sitting in a cream-colored chair wearing a graphic designed top with black glasses. My black hair is pulled up and I'm wearing silver earrings. Yes, my name is Rosa Cisneros. I am an artist and researcher at Coventry University, and today I'm here under the capacity of the WEAVE project, which is an EU-funded project that ERIAC is also a partner of. And just, you know, I want to reflect on a little bit on what you just said, my uncle, I guess Iulius, just said around the idea of including a diversity of Roma voices, and I think that's really perfect for setting up what we're trying to do, and yet also seeing that there are challenges in including the diversity of the Roma voice, and the multiplicity of that opens up a lot of questions around language, around terminology. And when we're linking that to visuals or to cultural heritage, whether that's tangible or intangible, it's even more complex and it takes time. And so within the WEAVE project and this partnership, next slide, please. that was funded or co-financed by the European Union under the CEF Connecting Europe Facility Program to enrich what's known as Europeana, the digital library for Europe. We worked together with a number of organizations, some academic, some grassroots. ERIAC was also involved. We had local community artists as well as digital software small media companies. So it's a real mix of a consortium, but also we had different kind of focus, but the Roma community was included. Next slide, please. Within the project, we really understood that there's a real issue. I think Imogen Bright Moon's comments that of what she achieved yesterday with the VNA, and you know, when there are these institutions that do hold content about us that haven't probably been collected with us, what does that do and how do we challenge that? And so this project was really looking at these collections and how do we challenge these errors that are in these spaces, but also offer new context. So it's about kind of identifying that problem, looking at the barriers, but then what is that possible solution and what is that next step? And so within we've been starting to take some of those next step. Europeana, for those that don't know, is a digital library that has over 50 million, when they say items, it can be visual, videos, audio files, images, a number of, on a lot of different contexts. It is a portal that links to other organizations. Sometimes those are available easily in open access, sometimes they're not. So again, Europeana is aware of those challenges, but they also hold content for, and I'm going to use GRT because within the project we've used that here in the UK. Gypsy Roma Traveler is a term that's used, but also within the project we've used Roma. So again, this idea of terminology and how do we navigate that? Next slide, please. So to do that, we, next slide. We're looking at tangible and intangible objects and how we collect and curate. And while we worked with different communities, whether that was the Spanish or the Portuguese folk dance or the Slovenian castles, I'll just focus on what we did with the Roma community within Weave. We looked at problematic content. We tried to identify some of those problems and the language and said, okay, here are solutions. But those solutions didn't come only from the consortium partners, but rather we really tried to work with the different communities at different levels. So sometimes academics, sometimes artists. And we use this idea called the lab day methodology. Next slide. Next slide, please. I said I'll just weave through. So yes, as I said, aggregating content. So we asked different providers to offer their content, and ERIAC was one of those providers. And why did we do that? And how did we kind of think about this content? Well, again, we had to really think about what we're offering to this major organization, but with the support of, as I like to think of, a global kind of idea of the local as well as thinking about the global. How, you know, what kind of material and language. And so we did that through the lab day. Next slide. The lab day methodology is, next slide please, is underpinned by communicative methodology. So it really is about bringing together different profiles, different voices into a space. Unfortunately, in a lot of these cases, it was a digital space, but in a way that also allowed us to reach many communities and different people and organizations. So the lab day was to look at a central question or problem or solution that might be emerging from the community itself and say, okay, let's look let's not autopsy, but let's say, what would that kind of long-term dream be, and what would that next step be for you in terms of what we could do, or what content would you like to offer? And we held over, I think, 15 lab days with communities in a number of different contexts. Next slide. And what emerged was really this idea of capacity building. And so the first series of lab days was looking at those questions, those tensions, and the second set of lab days, which started from January until June, was around capacity building. And I know capacity building was mentioned in the first panel, and it was again thinking about not only what the community has to do, but what can we demand from the organizations. And there were some really clear offerings that came from that. And so what emerged, particularly within Europeana, which was a big surprise, were two things. One, Europeana really reflected on some of the issues that were emerging, not only within Weave, but also within the other projects that Europeana is part of. And so they created an inclusion and diversity task force. That task force is also made up of different profiles. And they also ensured that they had representatives. And I'm fortunately feel very lucky that I can now be part of that task force, advocating for this multiplicity of voices, multiplicity of ways of working, ensuring that we're not only thinking about communities from an ethnographic point of view, but also from disabilities, from different ways of how do we make our material, our spaces more inclusive, and what does inclusive mean in different areas, in different spaces. So again, if next slide, please. So I will see, these are some of the partners, just so you can get a sense of who was involved. It was an 18-month project, so really small, kind of lots of learning coming out of that. Next slide. And what really has emerged is that we know that a lot of the questions that came up are not easy. We need a lot of time. We need, I think someone mentioned trust. There's a lot of trust that needs to, and how do we do that? That was, again, some of the lab days explored that. And what does it mean to really give the space to correct some of the items and some of the information that is circulating in these spaces? And that's not easy, but within the project, and I have to say that Europeana has really tried to model that. So not necessarily only asking or telling other organizations what they should do, but really trying to implement some of those changes within their own organization. And I will happily say that the Weave project has been used and as evidence for policy here in the UK. There was a select committee call out, and the Weave project gave three very specific recommendations to policy in that select committee around co-creation, working with the GRT community, and also ensuring that we have role models and people at different levels of their career or with, from different organizations involved. I'm aware of time, so there's lots I could say, but again, those lab days are also online. You can still contribute to, we have Padlets so that we could ensure that different people could also engage with the questions that we were asking. So you're welcome to also visit and offer content there. I know that there was a collection of items and of images that needed to be consulted, and before they went into Europeana, I think there were a few of our colleagues here today that were part of that consultation process. And I will finally say that, this idea of trust requires a certain level of intimacy. And so how is it that we build that intimacy, even though if we're talking about these kind of high level, this idea of policy changing, how do we bring and, ensure that capacity building is offering a space for trust, for the emotional labor, because there's also an emotional aspect to this work that I think we might not, always realize as part of the work. So that's another aspect that I think we've gave space to. There's some solutions that we offer, but again, there's so much more to do, as I think a lot of us has said. So I stop there. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Rosa. That was very, very interesting, and you're perfectly on time. There were even 10 seconds left.
Which is surprising, because you guys know I like to talk too much. So, so thank you. Neda, over to you. I don't need your time.
Please, we come back to the question and answer. Thank you, Rosa. Yes, exactly. Please, may I now give the floor to Neda Korunovska, our long-term experience Rio at work at the Open Society Foundations. Please, Neda.
Thank you. welcome everyone. It's really honored to speak on this subject. I think a bit bureaucratic, but I'll try to be as precise and entertaining as possible. I know many of my previous colleagues touched upon very important issues, and I would like to speak here as my personal experience or perception of what the gaps are in terms of the capacities within the Roma civil society, but also provide maybe a bit of a broader context in where this operates and how we can be more impactful both at influencing the EU policy, but also accessing or influencing the way the EU funding is being programmed and implemented. So before I started, I also will touch upon a bit more on culture, because I expect the area audience is mostly interested in media, arts, culture spheres. So this is also something I will touch upon. So maybe I will start with 3 points, main points. So EU funding, right, we have to always remind that it's aiming at supporting governments. So this is how it is designed, this is how it is structured, and this is how it is channeled. So it's not the purpose, this is kind of outlier to support civil society. The support to civil society is much bigger and more important in the countries outside of the EU. So this would be important for the Roma organizations coming from the Western Balkans or Ukraine or globally. But within the EU, the focus is a bit different. And I think there is a skewed perception because of where the most strongest Roma civil society come from, and especially from the enlargement region. So they had this experience of the pre-accession, and maybe this expectation remain. But in a sense, the thematic program to support capacity of civil society organizations, we typically see in the enlargement and neighborhood and global programs of the EU Foundation. Go back, I will start. So that was my first point. The second point is that there is also a skewed perception because of the region where most strongest Roma-led organizations are coming from, Central and Eastern Europe. Because if we look at the overall statistics, most available or most recently available for, I think, 2019, in total, only 15% of overall civil society benefit from EU funding, mostly through the national programs, and 5% of the civil society receive direct funding from the programs managed by the European Union. So I'm just giving the perspective not to kind of feel discouraged that there is a struggle among the Roma civil society to access the funding. So this is how it is. And I think the second point is that we are seeing a shift in the instruments through which civil society is benefiting from EU funds. And we are seeing a major shift from grants to contracts. So the main way in which civil society are actually benefiting from EU funding is through government contracts for provision of services from implementation. I haven't started with the presentation, so I'm just giving an initial overview. If you can go back to the initial slide. So basically the governments are contracting civil society to implement certain parts of their reform. So this is the main vehicle, and only very small 5% are actually grants that are going directly to civil society. Why is this important? Because of the agency of civil society. When you are implementing a contract, the terms of reference, the design of the program and everything is already designed either by the EU institutions or by the government. So the civil society do not have say in the way certain things are being designed or implementing. They're just providing the services of already kind of developed approach, as opposed to the grants where the civil society is actually bringing the voice from the ground up and providing solutions to the problems identified. And the third major trend issue that we are seeing is the changing role of the civil society. Previously or traditionally, civil society was seen as an intermediary between the people and the government. So kind of in an effort to consult citizens and improve the participation of citizens, the Commission and the governments will tend to cooperate with the civil society. Now with the digitalization, with the loss of credibility or because of attacks on the civil society, this is also under question. What will be the role of civil society under the new financial framework? So in this kind of global context, I would like now to speak about the policies and funding of the EU, and basically what we can expect as a Roma movement, civil society movement, in terms of where the EU can help and what we should not be expecting from the EU because of the limits it has. So next slide. So I will start with the competences. So if we look at the broader competences of the EU, we have exclusive competence of the EU, and then a huge bucket of shared competences, and then the supplement competences. So basically, only in the exclusive competence, the EU has the exclusive, basically, mandate to legislate, to fund, to operate. So this is where we are seeing the biggest role of the EU, and then in the joint, where both the government and the EU are legislating on the issues. And maybe I'll just point here: internal market, social policy, environment, consumer, and public health, security and justice. So these are the short competences. Now I lost Zoom, sorry. If you can see, you can hear me? Okay, I lost you for a bit. So culture is in this supplementary role, which means that the EU doesn't have competence to legislate or to have a bigger say. So we cannot expect much of this because the member states have retained their role to design and to influence the cultural policy, and that means that they are also basically influencing the way and the funding around culture to a very limited sphere. And traditionally, this was basically protection of cultural heritage, exchange between the ministries of culture and these European cities, etc. So I just want to say, why is this important? When we are dealing with proposal for funding or trying to influence certain policy, we should be always trying to present the issue through a competences that are where the EU is stronger. Because culture, as you will see, most of the funding will go through the lens of consumer. Our citizens as consumers of culture having access to the cultural products, and this is how the Commission is trying to embrace or basically increase the scope in which it can influence when it is the question of culture. Next slide. So when it comes to the youth, always we are going to the founding documents, and you will see here very limited reference to the culture in the agreements, right? The Maastricht Agreement, it says respect, it's a rich cultural and linguistic diversity, and then we can see a lot of programs from the culture program go to translation, because this linguistic is very important, because the member states are saying, okay, we are joining and we are cooperating in the area of cultural policy, but we want to make sure that our kind of linguistic and cultural diversity is protected. But that doesn't mean that there cannot be huge programs for translation in Romani language. So this is one area that is underexplored. So publications and production in Romani language is basically underutilized now. And then we have the article, which is basically framing this support role. So only we are supporting, helping the member states coordinate, etc. There is nothing exclusive around what you can do in the area of culture. Next slide, please. So EU funding, I'm not going to go into details, but just I just want to point out basically 4 points. So the EU funding is approximately 2% of the total funding of the national governments. So even within the funding and the programs that are dealt with through the EU, there is a 1/3 or more than 1/3 contribution by the national governments, and plus 98% that they are basically funding through the national budget. So my appeal would be that both the EU funding is relevant, but we are trying to switch and shift civil society to also look at the national budget, because this is where the main state priorities are defined, the main investments are being made, and the EU funding just is used mostly to supplement these reforms. The second point is for the new financial framework, that these are two main components. One is the recovery fund, so this is more loans, etc. I will not go, and the EU, the long-term budget of the EU, the multi-annual financial framework, and I will touch upon different aspects of this and how we can access them. The third question is management, and we are having here this direct versus indirect management. Why is this important? When the management of the funding is indirect, it is managed by the national government. So you are dealing with ministries, with operational programs, etc. Although it is a EU funding, and most of the EU funding is basically managed indirectly by the government. So again, the focus on the national budgets and the national governments comes more into question and importance. Although the new framework has switched a bit to that. If you can show the next slide, just wanted to show you how this chart shows how the composition of the EU funding has shifted. And this basically new reinforced priorities, the red line that only now goes up until 31% is this direct managed funding. So those are the programs that usually people are trying to access, the justice program or cultural Europe, etc. Previously, as you could see, the agricultural policy, the cohesion fund was biggest chunks of the funding. So we are having now for the first time the biggest chunk goes to these programs, which gives us hope that we could potentially see much more impact of the EU funding for Roma, because we know, and this was also confirmed by the EU auditor, that the EU funding was not reaching Roma up until this point. So it was ineffective, and this is a well-known fact, both recognized by the institutions. Next slide. So how do we navigate? So those are these three bubbles are basically the 1/3 lines that we basically saw on the previous slide. So one is the cohesion policy, and here most important for Roma is the European Social Fund Plus, ESF Plus, and the European Regional Development Fund. Then we have the Common Agricultural Policy and the new reinforced priorities, which is basically all the new programs, union programs, among which is Creative Europe. So basically, all this is the trick, right? All these now have a bit similar implementation, but they are managed by different institutions under different rules, etc. So application process is different, and this is why people say it's too bureaucratic. We cannot access it, we cannot understand it, etc. But in a way, when you are dealing with a certain issue and trying to access the funding, basically you should be kind of looking into, are you going in a funding that is directly managed by the government or indirectly? The biggest chunk of money, billions, will be managed directly by the governments. Just last week, ESF Plus program of Bulgaria, for instance, was approved. One of the first countries to kind of negotiate, agree, and approve all of the programs under ESF Plus, and a lot of millions, including explicitly for Roma, are there. So those are kind of human development, labor market policies, etc. So the biggest funding will go there, and that's why our appeal is look at the national budget, look at the operational programs, because the EU funding, in an essence, is mostly channeled through the governments, in a way how the governments through the ministries and through the operational forum. But if there is some controversial, right? Let's say for the culture, you want something that maybe it's not, you know, that the governments are not willing to expose or to support, etc. Then you are trying to see how you can access indirect funding, because you can be more critical towards the government. You can be more, let's say, progressive and push for certain things. And then if you're looking into the indirect, you should look at the most strongest competence. So are you gonna apply to Creative Europe, or maybe for you it's better to go, for instance, invest in EU or the LIFE program that provides, let's say, support to businesses, etc. So can you package it under different competence, let's say, as a consumer protection and access to it, rather than, let's say, cultural support to artisans and cultural diversity? Because when you have a program that is in this support tier, it will usually go for multi-country aspects, platforms European, because the focus is on coordination, kind of alignment, diversity, etc. For Roma, that is privilege, because they are artists and networks across Europe. It's not a challenge, but it is always going to be less targeting at the country level and more targeting at the broader level. Petrica said it's a long process. So as you see today, last week Bulgaria approved the ESF Plus. We are already in 2022, although this funding is from 2021. So we have these 2-3 years of backlog between when it's negotiated, when it's approved, when it will hit the ground in terms of payments and programs. And let's learn from the history, right? Maybe the next slide. I'm just speeding up the presentation. So if we look at the funding that went to culture and arts and media, we are seeing that it's more in the sense of basically addressing the barriers to access to cultural production. So we have support for media and film production through the Culture Creative Europe program, but we have also through the European Regional Development Fund, mostly protection of cultural heritage, but also a lot of investment in cultural infrastructure, reduced VAT for artists and cultural production. So, for instance, if we are looking into new Roma TV, museum, etc., it's gonna be the Regional Development Fund. So we need to negotiate and include it into the national operational program. So targeting member states, not the Commission per se. Then we have access to digital, so a lot of digitalization, etc. If you look at the Creative Europe, you have a national desk officer for each country. And just by clicking by them, you will see how much the governments are, let's say, pushing this, whether they are transparent or not. There's a huge difference between the national desk in Romania and Bulgaria. There's nothing, basically, some story old news. And let's say, look at Croatia, it's not Germany or other countries. So you could see this difference in how governments are dealing. And then I spoke about this, and my last point would be on the partnership principle. So the partnership principle, especially in the ESF Plus, it's a very high level. So governments have to cooperate and consult and include civil society, and they have to earmark funding to support capacity building of civil society and in other social partners. It's up to the Roma civil society to actually get involved in the structures for monitoring, programming, evaluation, implementation of the ESF funding. And unfortunately, we haven't seen this in the past, mostly because the Roma civil society has been boxed into the Roma policy, and to a less extent has been involved and allowed to influence mainstream policy. And I think this is a major shift we are supporting to be seen. That's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Neda. That was very insightful. Yeah, we can pick it up in a minute. Sorry to be so naggy with the time. Now we'll come to our last great speaker, Violeta Naydenova, a senior policy analyst at the Open Society Foundations as well. Please, Violeta.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for the invitation to area colleagues, and it was a privilege to hear the other speakers. After listening to my dear colleague Neda, I'm really afraid what to say after so much technicality. In fact, indeed, I'm working for the Open Society Foundations based in Brussels. Just to mention that the topic is extremely important. When I was reading it again, bringing the EU closer to the Roma. So it's not the Roma to the EU, but the other way around. This means that the EU has to go to the Roma. I think this is what it means. This is how I read the title. And in order to this to happen, I think that the dear EU officials needs to go and visit more often Roma communities. They need to go more often speak to civil society and understand the different local context, the different experiences and challenges. As earlier colleagues mentioned, it's really diverse. Roma is a diverse group, and because countries are also different, the technicality and the level of expertise and skills is also different. So you cannot put in one bucket that this is all for Roma and this is all what we need for all countries, not to mention enlargement countries. No, it has to be adapted to every location and every context. So I applaud you for the topic, that you chose this topic. And I think if we have to really implement the topic, let's have an action and a purpose to bring the EU really more close to the Roma, or bring EU officials really visiting more often communities, because I'm not sure they do enough. That's number one message that I come forward to. There is something that triggered a lot my own thinking, was Ciprian's speech. Because I am working in Brussels for so long now, about 8 years, even more, I was just wondering, is it really for everyone? Is it really that every civil society, Roma or non-Roma, but we speak about Roma, needs to access EU funding? Is it really necessary? Why I'm asking that? Because when we look, and after we heard everyone in the panel, it looks like you need so much time to invest in your skills, writing skills, in your fundraising skills, in your monitoring and evaluation skills, in your report writing skills, into project management. I think that's why Ciprian mentioned that a lot of NGOs died because they just couldn't handle it. Not to mention the financial capacity. How do you manage so much money all of a sudden? When you were managing a few thousands, now you have to manage 1 million. How do you do that? How do you spend the money? Are you able to be a spending machine? Because this is what it is. I think the idea would be that, and I discussed this with Petrica yesterday, is that we have a fund operator. I think it's not realistic that we now heavily invest in every Roma civil society out there. It's just impossible and unrealistic, because this will change the civil society. This is not their role to be a, and I would say it, that I think Neda mentioned it, is like service providers of the European Commission or of the governments. Is this really the role of the civil society? I don't think so. I think it was mentioned early, so please put it as a reflection mark on what could we do next. If we would have a fund operator where we would invest in few people in terms of skills, knowledge, writing, fundraising, managing funds, and those who can then help smaller NGOs to access funding and to manage the funding and to report the funding and to spend the money, I think that would be a different thing. Because small NGOs would keep still their own identity, they will be who they are, and they will be still having some financial independence out there. I guess that's why we are discussing EU funding, because a lot of the governments do not support civil society, and that's why NGOs, they turn an eye towards the EU in terms of support. So I wanted to open up with this because in terms of information, if you ask me, oh, Vili, can we organize an event where we would offer capacity building for NGOs? Yes, absolutely. There is no problem. We would pay a couple of thousands of euros, come in Brussels, we'll have wonderful training. Can you go back to your home country and really do it? Can you engage 4, 5, maybe more staff from your small NGO to do it? Can you really invest in project writing, like what Timmy mentioned in the beginning, how many projects you wrote and how many you succeeded to get? Question mark. Not to mention that when you want to engage with the EU, it means you need to engage in advocacy. How can you get an EU funding without not being acknowledged actor? Ready, Petrica knows it very well, Ref knows it very well, ERIAC knows it very well, ERGO knows it very well. I think everyone that engaged or has some experience with the EU and funding knows it very well. So do you have someone dedicated that is paid to do EU advocacy? Question mark again. So do think very well of what could you propose and what could be further done in that area. I think, again, a fund operator is not a bad idea to go forward. The EU is doing so much on supporting NGOs. I think information is there, availability of funding is there. Neda mentioned a lot, Isabela mentioned a lot, Iulius, other speakers. I would just add to the shopping list. I can share my screen quickly. Share. Can you just tell me if you see my screen? Can you just give me a feedback? Someone?
Opening up. It has started,
Okay.
but it's still black.
Okay. For me, it got frozen.
Yeah, maybe actually it got frozen because it's also here, it remains black.
Okay, so but what I wanted to share is that there is this great platform that the EU has built on funding and call opportunities. I think we can, maybe I can share it in the link, right?
Just put it in the chat, maybe you can put the link in the, post it in the chat. Yeah.
Yes, I'm going to put it in the chat, but now my mouse got frozen, so I'm not able even to move anything. Bear with me. So that's one thing that I wanted to share, this funding platform where you can search for available calls, for example, in the areas of outside culture. Neda mentioned Creative Europe. If you just type Creative Europe, you can see all the calls available from Creative Europe. DG Education and Culture has supported before funding in the area of Roma arts and culture. I even can you see me now back? Just yeah, okay. So so they have even a booklet where they show you what kind of Roma arts and culture programs they supported. I will send you that as well. And the third thing, which is extremely important in the arts and culture, is this new Bauhaus initiative that personally von der Leyen was very supportive of. And I think that anybody from ERIAC needs to be informed about it, needs to know about it. What it is, it's actually how they call it is probably you heard about the European Green Deal. Well, what they say is that the new European Bauhaus initiative is the soul of the Green Deal. Why do they say that? Because the idea is to bridge between the people, science and technology, arts and culture. They want to also have connection between the green and digital and transform people's life. And the third and not the least important is also to have to address complex societal problems through co-creation. So it's all about sustainability, aesthetics, and inclusion. When you ask me, if you ask me in what area, these three, aesthetics, sustainability, and inclusion, it's mainly in the way how you build things. For example, you can manufacture a chair, and you should build it not just in a sustainable way, but also creative way and also accessible, inclusive for everyone. If you build a house, the same. If you make any artistic product, it should be the same. Maybe this is an idea we all have also discussed with some of you on what do we do with the non-recyclable plastic? So why don't we turn the non-recyclable plastic into an artistic project? And I know ERIAC has an experience with that, but I would like to put it more forward that it can be even in the strategy of ERIAC for the future, because the EU would love to support such projects in the future. I want to end up here and just to again put the idea forward. I think a fund operator idea would be a great option, or one of the options that could be discussed that Roma civil society needs. And the second thing is, let's really bring the EU closer to Roma by bringing EU officials to Roma communities. And I think ERIAC is in perfect position to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear Violeta. That was a wonderful wrap up, what you could do. I think it all brought together what you all kind of said, no? In a way, I also thought, again, it's something so structural, the same burdens, so many organization experience, the same lack of capacities, but the inabilities. And at the same time, I feel what you also just said now, also at the end, the lack of information. I mean, these meetings are in the end so great to exchange all about all your experience and to exchange on it, because yeah, there's hardly capacities to actually retrieve all this information, no? Leave alone to have the capacities to then translate it. And thank you also very much for mentioning this Bauhaus initiative, which you mentioned to me before. And also I think this green idea is very, very important. We also experience with ERIAC that it's a requirement very often to have an environmental justice approach to applications, no? So that's really something we all should keep in mind, additionally to everything else. But sorry, enough from me now. Please, dear audience, I hope you're not tired yet, but would still like to engage. Please, now the floor is yours.
Can I? Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. First, I would like to appreciate all the discussion here proposed by ERIAC and all the speakers. Timea, you mentioned 17 applications for the EU funds, if I am correct. How many of them were successful? That is my question to you. Regarding Neda, I agree what she said, and I consider that this should be an opening of our meeting here, because 98% of funding is directed to national government. And that's an issue. Yes, and we should know that from the beginning, how to deal with populist or right-wing governments who don't want even to recognize anti-Gypsyism. I recently wrote with Elżbieta a report on Poland, and I compared communication from the EU on unions, equality, and Council recommendation from 2021 on anti-Gypsyism. And in the government, there is no recognition whatsoever of anti-Gypsyism. How you can ask them money to do anything like projects or monitoring if they don't recognize even anti-Gypsyism. So another question, there are people in Brussels. What is the cooperation between you, Timea, ERIAC, and them? What are the activities of who are the active, and what is their capacity to influence things, to change things? So this is a question also to you. And as regards Iulius and Ciprian, I agree with Iulius that we have development and we have a positive development in the EU in long term, and that such documents like EU Council recommendation, yes, on anti-Gypsyism, which appeared in 2001, would not appear in the government level, yes, in some countries, maybe in Germany, yes, but not in Poland. And we expect that this government will lose its position and people will elect new one, open to diversity, minorities, Roma, and so on. So here is a challenge, you know, how we can cooperate with this future government on the issue of funding for such organizations as Roma, ERIAC, and ERGO, and others. So thank you very much. And I appreciate all for what you said. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrei, for all the questions. A lot of us were addressed. I don't know if the others also would like to respond. I'm not sure I want to take the floor. Just very shortly clarify that those 17 applications that I spoke about that ERIAC wrote between 2017 and 2020 were all unsuccessful. We failed terribly. And sometimes we failed with 1 or 2 points just below the cut. That's even more upsetting. Yes, and in 2021, and as I said, we diversified our strategy and we decided that we partner in smaller projects as project partners, while we also paid better attention to what Petrica called our attention to, the evaluators' notes and feedback. So I wouldn't say that brought a shift. I simply think that we have matured enough with our language and bureaucratic skills to finally make a successful application.
Thank you.
Thank you, Timea. You also addressed other of the former speakers, please.
Maybe I'll come quickly on the successful rate and the tactic and approach. So one of the key issues is this track record. So none of the newly established organizations, even if they bring huge capacity and are very well positioned and kind of recognized actor, will be automatically recognized by the EU, because they want to see track record of managing EU funding, and then it always goes from smaller partners and then to elite organizations. So this is kind of the strategy. It's not the correct one. And I would really echo what Petrica said, that there is a disproportionate unbalance of the details of the smaller project vis-a-vis the bigger project, which is completely opposite in the private world and how it should be. And this is something that we are trying to push with the Commission. And on the populist governments, that's why I say it's very important to see this indirect direct funding, and you cannot push for certain things when you have such a government through operational programs. You have to try to look through the community programs, whether it's going to be Creative Europe or the program for justice and security or other programs that are available, because this is how it will work. You will need to have some kind of independence vis-a-vis the government, although, as Ciprian said, the political context is changing. And if you see the role and influence now Poland has because of its position vis-a-vis the Ukrainian government, it will be shifting the kind of leverage and the willingness of the Commission to push against Poland, because in a way we are fighting competing interests, and the war of Ukraine unfortunately has this again two-way implication on Roma, as we've seen with how Roma refugees are treated. Thanks.
Thank you, Neda. Does anybody else want to pick up on this, or Iulius, please?
Yeah. Thank you, Andrzej, for your intervention. I think we always concentrate a bit too much on engaging with EU and less on engaging with national governments and local authorities. And of course, the question is, how do we make ourselves attractive for these institutions? Of course, one way is to build expertise and to offer this expertise, yeah. But that's not enough. The most important would be to engage directly in politics and then to exert pressure from inside, yeah, build alliances and so on. And that will be one way, because most of the funding, as Neda pointed out, comes through the national governments. And then, you know, this is a much more important leverage, yeah, than just engaging with EU. On the other hand, we do have to see how we build transnational alliances to apply for important EU projects. And here we are still in a learning process, because we have few actors that would be able to bring together, yeah, including ERIAC through its membership, yeah, to build a large alliance, a transnational alliance, and to apply for EU funding. But then it remains also a matter of you know, how we deal with the administration of this. And we know that not always the selection process is the most transparent or the one that we really want. I think that's the point I want to make. On the other hand, I want to point out something else, that the way we conceptualize Roma impacts also the way we engage with local authorities, with national governments, and with the European Commission. So far, we are going on the policies of social inclusion, which is the less important part of the EU policies, while with other policy areas, we are not so much active in. So we have to think in this process how we define, conceptualize Roma and the problems we are facing And then as part of this process is also how we engage with these institutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Iulius, for this important point. Violeta, do you want to pick up on this? I think maybe if there's nobody else, Violeta might be the last one. So we run out of time, that then Timea can conclude. Please, Violeta.
Yes, thank you. It's because Iulius triggered with me. He said local authorities, but also engaging with national governments. We as open society foundations in Brussels, we decided not to do EU funding advocacy, simply because it's such a heavy business to do, and it is business. It's literally a business. I'm repeating again, please understand it very clearly. Big organizations in Brussels that have been managing EU funds for decades have sort of became conglomerates on managing EU funding. As someone mentioned, you need the background. Of course you need the background, but you have been there for years, for ages. You have developed relationships, contacts, trust, so coming from a country where corruption is quite open, I have to say here corruption is quite diplomatic and very unfortunately obvious. So please, I just want that we are realistic in what we are saying. How many of you know that there is a so-called EU Roma network, which is managed by FSG? How many of you know that? They are the biggest experts on EU Roma funding. They know so much. They are actually bringing I think twice a year, on a yearly basis, EU governments to discuss specifically EU funding for Roma. And FSG is the fund operator in Spain, and maybe Spanish organizations know better than me, for the Roma funding. So I just want to put really a big inflection there on we engaging on issues on EU funding, and before understanding the complexity of what we are challenged with. This is just my message. Don't forget, it's only very few really Roma that we know that are sitting in the so-called management authorities, which are deciding how money would be spent at national level, like Romania, Bulgaria. We know them on our hands. So just be thoughtful about that. And if we discuss further, we need to understand the context much better than we do now. Thank you.
Thank you, Violeta. Yeah. Sorry that we ran out of time. I feel that there is much more to be discussed. Thank you all, dear speakers, dear audience, for your questions. I will now give the floor back to Timea Younghouse to conclude, please.
Thank you, Juliana. It is important that I am absolutely humbled by the expertise, the knowledge, the views and opinions, and also the criticism that we brought to the table today. We came together to share know-how and share with each other achievements. It was a very safe space also for sharing our doubts and criticism. But the result of the conference is actually not bringing Roma closer to EU, but giving a perfect roadmap and almost precise recommendations to the EU on how to create grants, how to include Roma into the grant making, and also how to change the complete system of policy influencing by Roma people. I am absolutely impressed by the speakers. I also don't feel too qualified to make a summary, and I wish that our very own Anna Mirga Krusenica, who is responsible for the ERIAC-EU relations, could sit here and celebrate with us today the achievements of not just the ERIAC fundraising efforts after 17 failure, finally making a real EU project, but also to witness today's conclusions. I refer to some of the points that are important, very subjective notes. Please forgive me for the very subjective notes. I realize that we all struggled with the notion of working with external consultants, not just because we find that corruption is spreading, but also because the Roma context, language, and approach is extremely different from the language and bureaucracy of EU expectations. And now we have several organizations who are able to go through the hoops of evaluation, language, and bureaucracy, and have learned the process of grant making, maybe even policy influencing, but certainly we need capacity building, and we need to disseminate the know-how that we developed. In policy making, we learned the long process of ERGO learning, the negotiation, and the broad outreach that they have done in the past. And we see how EU policy influencing requires collaboration and cooperation with other policy influencing agencies. In the first panel, we saw the shocking fact that Roma voice is still missing from the EU grant making and policy influencing, and we are still speaking about Roma inclusion, consideration of the participation of Roma in EU projects, and unfortunately, we even learned in the second and even more provocative panel with Iulius, Neda, and Violeta how civil society organizations do not participate in the grant making. They're simply providing content for the projects. Or we can go on with the comment Violeta Naydenova just made on major agencies monopolizing the business of Roma grant making. We emphasize today that this is a first of coming together to continue to build our capacities and build the power that we have together as the strongest Roma organizations who are wishing to further disseminate this knowledge on fundraising and EU policy influencing. And we made the conclusion that this cannot be a first, and we need the continuation of these discussions. Why is it important for ERIAC that its large and diverse community, which is currently 276 members of Roma and non-Roma organizations and individuals, plus our donor organizations and partners, let's say 50 partners in this regard, and the larger community of partners and contributors, collaborators who are not in our membership, maybe an additional 150 person and entities. So why is it important to bring Roma closer to the EU, and why is this important mission for ERIAC, a Roma cultural organization, you might ask, after today's gathering? Because ERIAC has been advocating from its birth since 2017 that to take up the fight against nationalisms, racism, anti-Semitisms, and anti-Gypsyisms means to give forms of positive, empowering, and genuine visions about our common belonging. And this is indispensable for the nurturing of the next generations of not only Roma, but Europeans who are aware of our interdependencies, mutual contributions, connected histories, and our inseparable futures. Thank you so much for your attention and your contribution today, and we must continue. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.